what else could we do? What could I explore? What do you want from me? Could we talk about a contract that's 50 years long? No, we can't, Darren. All right, what about one that's 5 years long? Maybe.
Okay.
Could we talk about improving the quality, reducing the packaging? Could we work together on blah, blah, blah? There's a million things we could talk about. Now, none of them might bridge the gap between £10 a case and £8 a case, but let's try.
Welcome to the Innovate podcast, a show where we discuss, dissect, and attempt to rebuild the world of product and category within consumer goods. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Darren A. Smith, a veteran of the grocery industry with over 30 years experience, I think, working either for retailers or advising manufacturers and brands. Darren and I briefly crossed paths as buyers and category managers at Sainsbury's back in the very early noughties, which we may discuss in a moment. But Darren, welcome to the Innovate podcast. Delighted you can join us. How are you today?
Hey Ben, I'm good. We're in the process of moving house, not today, but in the next couple of weeks. So I am struggling with that process. There's a reason it's stressful.
So yeah, you just thought you'd add another huge seismic life event onto the already kind of generational economic challenges that we're facing.
That's absolutely true. I think we just squeezed in before the interest rates went through the roof.
Right. Yeah. That's not a joking matter, actually. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Good. So Darren, just for the benefit of the listeners, I guess a natural place to start would just be to introduce yourself, talk through your kind of background from Sainsbury's through to now, and just talk about what you're focusing on with your current business, MBM, if that's okay.
Of course. So I started Sainsbury's in 1990. And at that point, I was the assistant. Now, that's the important part. I was the assistant cottage cheese buyer. I wasn't even the real one. And I didn't even know what cottage cheese was at the ripe old age of 19. So that's where I started. And then I took on various buying roles for the next 13 years. And my last real job was looking after the fruit team for Sainsbury's, where I decided that actually I wanted to go and see if I could do something by myself, set up MBM. And ever since, we've worked on soft skills training.
Okay.
For the past 20 years now.
So soft skills training, I guess that could be quite broad. It clearly focused on people. What are the kind of the key areas that you focus on in terms of developing skills?
The key ones that people want are, how do I get the most out of my time management?
Yep.
How do I get the most out of my people management, leadership skills? And how do I get the most out of my deals, particularly in the industry that you and I are in? So it's negotiation predominantly, it's time management, and it's people management skills. They're the three. There are a number of other soft skills. The bit I really like is Jack Ma recently, the chairman of Alibaba, said that with the progress of AI, soft skills is the only way forward.
Right, awesome.
Which is great. So we can try and process data really quickly and be analysts, but ultimately, it's about how you and I interact, about the teams we build, and about how we lead people is the future.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. So, you know, we're recording this in mid-November. It is an incredibly challenging market, both within grocery and food and drink specifically, but you know, generically, we have, you know, as just kind of Western consumers, we've kind of lurched from generational challenge of COVID through to the kind of the latest generational challenge of the economic crisis. So you talked about negotiation skills there. Clearly, manufacturers, private label and brand, that's probably one of the main things that their commercial teams are doing at the moment. That process in terms of working with their retail partners, their food service partners to effectively kind of reach a commercial position that can enable survival. Not to sound kind of too dramatic about it, but I think that's what many manufacturers and, in fairness, retailers are facing at the moment. So that's the topic that we're going to dig into today. It's looking at negotiation skills and how our listeners can kind of improve those skills from their own personal perspective and kind of bring some of those ideas into their businesses as well. Do you want to just give a little bit of background, I guess, to start before we kind of delve into the some of the specific areas about how What are the kind of the key principles within negotiation that people should be thinking on, and then we'll move on to these kind of 7 areas that we're going to discuss today.
I think it's firstly worth saying, Ben, I'm feeling for all those people. Both account managers on this side, buyers on this side. It's tough. It's hard. Yes, they get paid the big bucks, as you and I did, as buyers and as account managers, but it's hard. Conflict is hard. Anyone who says that they enjoy conflict or they don't mind conflict, they're lying. Conflict is tough. It's mentally grueling. You go home at the end of the day and it's still spinning around in your mind. So it's really tough for these guys at the moment. Now, here's the real crux of this. It's harder to negotiate with an amateur negotiator than a professional one. Okay. And the reason for that is amateur negotiators tend to do fight or flight or sanctions. If you don't give me that, I'm off to find someone else.
Right.
That's really hard because they're not working with this art form. They're not dealing with the complexities of the negotiation. It's just fight or flight. So what we aim to do is try and help the buyers and the account managers to be more, let's call it professional, or we prefer effective negotiators, because they're easier to work with. They understand the science, the art, the game, and they understand that a win-win must happen.
Yeah, that's interesting. The empathy piece, I think, is quite important, because the buyers that I still know in the industry, they've had a pretty miserable 18 months, actually. I know it's on both sides, but the amount of kind of requests coming into them from a cost and commercial perspective has been unremitting. That's pretty much, certainly the ones that I talk to, that's all they've dealt with, and that's not a particularly kind of joyful thing to do at all. You and I know as former buyers that actually the much more kind of positive elements of a buying role are looking at kind of category strategy and how you increase the size of the pie, not how you kind of shrink margins and all that type of thing. And there's very little of that. I think it is just unremitting. So I do think that empathy is a good place to start. Yeah,
it is. It's very tough for them on both sides. They both want to get through this. They don't want a 4th or 5th or 6th round of price increases on either side. Unfortunately, it's the way the world is. They've got to get through it, and they've got to try and be friends at the end of it.
And from your dealings across the industry, do you see the retailers giving their buyers a lot of support at the moment in terms of kind of either negotiation skills training or just general kind of support for what they're going through?
I think there is a lot of support out there. It's also not forgetting that it's damn tough. And I think no matter what support you give, ultimately, you've got to go up against that cold face, and you've got to face into every day 3, 4, 5 price increase requests that you just don't want to deal with. You rather deal with the other stuff that grows the category, not just makes you stand still. It's a bit like getting a service on our car at times, isn't it? You go to the garage, you get your service, you pay your 500 quid, get back in your car, nothing's different. Price increases can feel a little bit like that. A lot of hard work for not a lot. Yeah,
and there's certainly, the benefit to the consumer is it's not obvious. It's not front of mind, is it? There's no real kind of change to shelf price in many of these instances. So difficult times.
And no one's going to thank you for it. The shopper's not thanking you for higher increases. No. The buyer's not thanking you. That tough all around. Let's see if we can help some of these guys to be more effective negotiators and make their life maybe 1% better.
Yeah, indeed. So on that note, there's 7 areas that we're going to talk about today that you work with on a daily basis in terms of the work that you would or the kind of approaches that you would advise people to adopt when it comes to improving negotiation skills. So I guess in terms of the obvious first one to start with is preparation. I've heard you reference this term of the square dance before. How do you kind of work with people when they're preparing for a negotiation, first of all?
So it's worth providing some context, first of all. There are roughly 4 stages of a negotiation. If you were to Google it, there's 4, 5, 6, 7. But let's keep it simple. There are 4. Preparation, exploration, proposal, conclusion, or summary. Most negotiators, amateur negotiators, skip the first 2. They skip the preparation and the exploration. Where do they start? They start by calling up our dear friend PowerPoint and typing some slides. PowerPoint is about as useful to negotiating as you being hungry, Ben, and sellotaping a sausage roll to your stomach. It's going to do diddly.
Yeah.
You might think it's looking good, but it's going to do diddly squat. So what we want to do is help these guys have a simple template for preparation, and PowerPoint ain't it. It just isn't going to work. So what's the alternative? We provide a simple one-page template that poses some questions that the negotiator needs to ask. And they're things like, what's your wish? I want to get £8 a case, 200 extra stores listing, or I just want to get cost price increase of 8%. What's your walk away? I need to get 4%. Okay, so that's my top and bottom. Left and right, we've got our gives. What am I prepared to give to keep the wheels of this negotiation moving forward? And what would I take? If I'm going to take a lesser cost increase, then maybe there's some other things I could get. Could I do a category review? Could I get some free data? What is it? And we call these gives and takes the grease or the oil of the negotiation because they keep it moving forward. Because without these gives and takes, you end up top and bottom and you're haggling.
Okay. So
preparation is the square dance. Why we called it the square dance, I'm not sure, but we called it that about 20 years ago and it's stuck. So it's a simple template that they can download off our website. We came up with it because we were frustrated by amateur negotiators going into negotiations and starting with 10 slides of PowerPoint and presenting. But by presenting, you're going straight into proposal stage here. You skip these two stages.
Right, okay.
So we don't want to start with PowerPoint. If your listeners take nothing else away from here, don't start with PowerPoint. It is not a preparation negotiation tool.
Okay. So with the square dance template, you're effectively kind of getting all of the pieces that you can move around in the negotiation. You're getting them ready. You're getting them clear in your mind, and you're ready for first interaction with the individual on the other side of the table. I guess
you are, and there's some other pieces in the middle of it. I'll just add a few more advanced pieces where it asks what tools might you use. So I was watching a film a little while ago. Have you seen Ocean's 11, or it might be 11 or 12? You know
I have. I've certainly seen a couple of the Ocean's film. I can't remember the numbers, but yeah, I have.
It was one of them. I'm sure there's Ocean 10 to 19 now. And I think it was Brad Pitt says to George Clooney, "We've got to do this con type thing. Let's do a Lucy-Lou followed by a Jacoby and a painted wall." Now, we're not supposed to know what those things are. What we are supposed to see is these are con tricks. So my question to your listeners is, what tools are they putting in play for their negotiation? And that's what the square dance asks in the middle of the template. What tools are you going to use? For instance, are you going to use a Russian front, an up and over, a silence they will have heard of? But there are probably 100 negotiation tools, and they've got to select the right ones for their negotiation. At the moment, the preparation is, I'll start on PowerPoint, type some slides, I've had a bit of a think on the train, let's see what happens. That's not effective negotiation.
Okay. So those things like Russian front, those are techniques in terms of how to handle a negotiation, are they, I presume?
Yes, they're techniques that you can employ. Now, we're not proposing that people we train use all these techniques. We are proposing they grab 3, 4, or 5 and use them well. It's better to have 3, 4, or 5 used well rather than 50 you've got no clue about.
Okay. So just give us an example of, you mentioned the Russian front, for example. What is that as an example of a potential technique?
I'll do the up and over just because it will stick in their minds a bit more. Do you remember the old garage doors that were up and over? The big steel ones that creaked? Yeah. Normally broken, the springs were no good. Keep that as a metaphor in your mind, if you would. So let's say you and I are buying a car, you're buying my car, and make me a ridiculous offer for my Fiesta worth £5,000, let's say. What offer would you make me, Ben?
£1,500.
If you could give me cash, your first dog, and you could also give me your car, then I'll absolutely give that to you. All you're doing is taking their offer and matching it with an equally ridiculous offer. It has to be credible. I was doing a bit of comedy, but it has to be credible. And what happens is the person who made the first offer says, hold on, by what you said, my first offer was a bit ridiculous. Yes, it was. So you never need to say no to someone in a negotiation because you just take what they've said and you find a way to match it.
Right. Okay. So there's lots of different approaches and techniques that people can use along similar, dissimilar lines. Okay, fine. So we've looked at preparation. What's the next step for people to consider?
I think the most famous tool, and it's taught by every training company in the world on negotiation, is if you, then I. You might remember it from your Sainsbury's days.
Yeah, it does ring a bell. Yeah.
So every trainer trains this one. And the reason they do is because it's really, really effective and really, really simple. Basically, it says when we get to this stage, which is the proposal stage, I might say to you, if you can buy my Fiesta for £5,000, then I'll throw in some free mats.
Okay.
And the reason it works is because there's two parts to the sentence. There's the if you, then I. And by structuring it in the bit that you want second, the then I, it makes the other person listen to it. Okay. Because if I were to say, for instance, if I, you might put your hand out, try and shake my hand. I didn't get to say the bit I wanted. Right. So if you, then I. Now, what typically happens when people start using this tool is they get it round the wrong way, and that's okay. Learning and training is a bit like tuning in an old radio. Sometimes you get the music and you hear Noddy Holder playing his Christmas thing. Sometimes you don't. But you have to keep trying to tune it in. So you have to keep practicing if you, then I, until you hear the music. You've got it tuned in.
Because reflecting on negotiations that I had when I was a buyer and others since then, there's probably quite a difference between negotiating face to face, so sitting across the other side of a table with a buyer, which is great in many ways. You're probably more likely to reach a resolution, but equally it does add a fair amount of performance pressure, versus email negotiations, which I know kind of still happen a fair amount. Do these kind of techniques in terms of preparation, etc., do they still apply to whatever the medium that you're using to kind of actually communicate and negotiate with the other party?
Most of the techniques will apply whatever the format is.
Okay.
Because you're trying to move the negotiation forward to a win-win. The bit that is really interesting is over here, like you and I are doing at the moment. Mm-hmm. When we're training people at the moment, we need to train them face-to-face, we need to train them over screen, and we need to train them over email, maybe even text as well. But let's say those three formats. This one's particularly interesting because when we're talking and coaching with our learners, you'll see some of them like this, or like this, right, or the light's bad. This will halve your influence and your ability to negotiate. We've got to make sure that we're framed properly, like I am. I'm filling up as much of the space as possible. My headroom's quite small. I've got decent light and I'm talking to the camera. Yep. You've probably been in meetings where someone's talking to you like this because they've got 2 or 3 monitors. It just makes them less effective and influential. Yep. So we've got to be really careful about how we're coming across on this screen. And you can see me use my hands. You can't see what's below here. Of course you can't. So I've got to bring my communication up and I've got to show you what I'm trying to say. Right. Okay. Now, the other thing that's worth knowing is that when we negotiate over here, we are at 1 million megapixels. In real life, you and I are about 576 million pixels. So it's reduced 500 times. So I can't see all the little non-verbal cues that you're making, which is why this is exhausting for everyone over screen. Because I'm struggling to see all the little things that are going on around your face to see what you're really saying and thinking. Yeah, and that's why we finish these calls and we're knackered.
Right, particularly after a day of back-to-back calls. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yes.
You're from what you hear around the industry at the moment. Are most negotiations, are they happening on Teams and Zoom, or are they happening on email or face-to-face, or all of the above?
So if we take COVID, it was obviously Teams completely, screen completely. Yeah. We're starting to see some more face-to-face coming in, and I would certainly encourage our account managers to try and negotiate to get FaceTime. Now, when you get that FaceTime, try to make sure you're not there for 2 hours. Try and use the time effectively, but that FaceTime is really important versus screen because it's 500 times clearer as to what they're really saying, and that's important.
Okay. Okay. So we've looked at the kind of the preparation and the early stages. What would be the next area to focus on when you're working with people?
Yeah, have you ever seen a Monty Python sketch where they're haggling at a market?
Yes, I think I have. Yeah.
It's a great sketch, worth looking up. And what happens is one guy tries to haggle with the other one, and the other guy says, no, all right, I'll take it for that. No, you must haggle. No, well, I've just said I'll take your price. No, you must haggle. And it's a great sketch. The point is that there are a number of ways of resolving a conflict, two of which are negotiation and haggling or bartering.
Okay.
Now, it's important to know that they're different. Most negotiators are haggling, and that's okay. It's still a valid form of resolving a conflict. What we're teaching our learners to become an effective negotiator is to know the difference. So haggling is you and I are buying Ray-Ban sunglasses in a market in somewhere in the Middle East. And you say to me, Darren, these are 80 euros. And I say, no, I couldn't possibly do that. They're 10. And we meet in the middle. And that's haggling, and we've resolved the conflict. Haggling is on one dimension. Normally price, it can be time, but let's say it's price for the moment. Mm-hmm. And then there's negotiating. Negotiating is discussing across multiple dimensions: price, color, delivery, quality, blah, 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 whatever those things are.
Right, okay.
Negotiating is much more of an art form, much more complex, much harder to do. Haggling isn't. So we need to know which one we're doing and which will be the most effective.
How do you handle it if one party is negotiating, one party is haggling?
I would try to bring the other party to negotiating. And you're going to do that by introducing tradables, or those gives and takes that we talked about earlier. Those extra things that make the negotiation a bit more interesting. Right.
Okay. So haggling is effectively on a linear scale of one dimension. Negotiating is looking at multiple moving parts to try and reach a resolution. Okay.
Absolutely. We've all done the haggling at the market in the Far East or in the Middle East. Negotiating is what we really ought to be doing more of, because we'll get more back for our buck.
Right. Okay. So we're trying to avoid haggling. We're trying to get into negotiating using a more structured approach, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So haggling is not negotiating, is the takeaway.
Okay. You mentioned this concept of tradables there. Just expand on that a little more. I mean, I guess that's kind of part of preparation as well, and knowing how to leverage them during the negotiation, but just expand a bit on what you mean by tradables.
Amateur negotiators come to the negotiation with, I want that, you want that, we end up with stalemate.
Right.
Because we're both hitting it probably on one dimension of price, and we're not agreeing. And that's probably because there's no bargaining arena, there's no overlap. We're just part. You're at £10 a case, I'm at 8. The tradables or the give and takes on our square dance are things that might bridge the gap. So you won't give me the £10 a case I need. Well, what could you give me? Well, Darren, I could give you another 200 stalls or free sampling, something in the magazine, pause, whatever it is. Okay, well, that takes us a little bit forward. And now in my mind, not a £10 a case, but I could reduce it to £9.50. Okay, and let's do that. Now, price is important, of course it is. But if we just go in with price only, we're going to end up in a stalemate. So what other things could we ask for? If, for instance, I had a blank checkbook, what could I put in it for you?
Okay. In the current climate, I'm hearing a lot of, albeit anecdotal stories of suppliers going to retailers and saying, we need this cost price by next Friday, or we stop supplying. That's one dimension that feels quite linear. As a kind of flipping back to our former careers, how would you kind of go about handling that type of thing, where it's almost not a negotiation, it's a little bit of a demand, isn't it, really?
It is. It's what we call sanctioned negotiations. So that's where I come back to the more amateur negotiators. If you can't do that, we're off. Mm-hmm. Now, that may just happen. What we need to make sure we do is this next stage. We've got preparation, exploration. Okay, we might get to that stage, but just before we do, What else could we do? What could I explore? What do you want from me? Could we talk about a contract that's 50 years long? No, we can't, Darren. All right, what about one that's 5 years long? Maybe.
Okay.
Could we talk about improving the quality, reducing the packaging? Could we work together on blah, blah, blah? There's a million things we could talk about. Now, none of them might bridge the gap between £10 a case and £8 a case, but let's try.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's have an exploration. Just because I'm exploring doesn't mean I'm accepting I will give you this. All I'm doing is finding other ways to try and bridge this gap.
What's your view on because let's assume that both parties come to the table with tradables and they're being exchanged, but you couldn't possibly know in advance what the other party's tradables were. So you're likely to have, certainly as an account manager, you're likely to have to go back to your business and kind of get input and feedback and approval. This idea of kind of fragmenting negotiations into chunks versus trying to kind of solve it all in one hit. What would your advice and guidance be on that? And
you're right, we hear this a lot, where either the negotiations get escalated internally because the account manager couldn't do it, or this thing goes on forever. So in the square dance, the other benefit it has is I, as an account manager, let's say, fill out my square dance. I go to my boss and say, this is what I'm thinking of doing. What do you think? A, I genuinely want your feedback because you know the account. Well, I wouldn't try a Lucy-Lou, but I might try a blah, blah, blah tool. Okay, because we know Bob and Bob might respond to that. That's good. But also, boss, could you sign off this? £10 a case, £8 a case. Yeah, I can sign that off. Now, what normally happens is most bosses get really nervous and they say something like, but you won't go straight to £8 a case, will you? No, boss, of course I won't. Trust me. I've been here 20 years. I know what I'm doing. Okay, as long as you don't go straight down to there, I'm okay. And what you get is authority, a bargaining arena to negotiate with. Because otherwise, and you and I did this, as buyers, we go, well, if you haven't got the authority, don't talk to your boss. And then the account manager loses all credibility. We haven't got an effective account manager, and we're just now dealing, with a sales director forevermore. It doesn't work for either of us.
Okay.
So the square dance enables authority.
Okay. But there's probably quite a few kind of tradables that are brought to the table by both parties, I would guess, that are hard to kind of assign a value to. You brief example there of kind of a retailer saying offering space in a magazine or marketing space on shelf, whatever it might be. That those are quite hard to kind of assign a value to. So it would be difficult for anybody, even reasonably senior, to kind of say yes to that and then go back and actually figure out, oh shoot, I've just thought that was worth 50k. It's actually worth 15k to us. So I would have thought there are going to be times when you do need to kind of get some input from your business, and that might kind of break the negotiation into chunks potentially, rather than it being resolved in one traditional hit.
You're absolutely right. That will happen, and you might need to chunk the negotiation. But if you want to speed up the process because time's against you, then maybe you agree up front. I've got an hour and a half with the buyer. We're going to try and get to a proposal within 20 minutes. Then I'm going to call for an adjournment. Buyer, can I have 5 minutes? I just need to go and talk to my boss, get feedback. I'll come straight back.
Okay.
Straight phone. Nice. This, what do you think? Yes, no, back in, go.
Yeah, okay.
It doesn't have to be a combination of 6 meetings, my boss coming in, 5 emails. It doesn't have to be protracted. We make it protracted because we're worried about the conflict and we're not prepared.
So carve out some time, get all of the relevant kind of potential decision makers and stakeholders ready and available, and try and reach a resolution. Okay, that's nice. Yeah. And
that's why often they get escalated, because we either don't have the authority to negotiate or we don't like the conflict. I hear a lot, and it happens in training, where 2 people go, okay, we'll make a plan. No, you're just avoiding the conflict.
Right.
You've got to get stuck into this. You need to be prepared, and you've got to trade.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like a pizza. I send it to you. It's deep and crusty. It's got pineapple and ham on. You take half my pineapple off, put some chorizo on, get rid of my ham, make it thin and crispy. You send it back. And we do this in stage 3. And proposal. That's the way it has to work. Not we'll go and make some plan and we'll actually come back to this in 3 months with a plan that no one likes, because we're still back to the original problem. You wanted £10 a case, I wanted £8. We're not solving the problem.
Yeah, we're nowhere nearer. Okay. So we've moved through preparation, we've done some exploration, we've got kind of tradables moving. You talk about this concept of no free fish, which is a very intriguing headline. Talk a bit more about that.
One of the biggest pitfalls that amateur negotiators face is no free fish. So imagine the Arctic. We've got the snow blizzard coming in. We've got our fishermen. Cut a hole in the ice, fish coming out.
Yep.
Onto the sledge, we've got the Huskies. He's now on his way back. All right. So imagine now, fisherman, pile of fish, Huskies, long day of fishing, we're going back. Polar bear, big bugger, comes out of the side. Now, what do you do with a polar bear that's now chasing you?
Run as hard as possible.
Well, you probably shout at the Huskies to go faster. You grab one of the fish off the pile.
Yeah.
And you throw it. The polar bear thinks, oh, that's lovely. Finishes that because there's a big polar bear and eats the fish quickly. What does it do next?
Well, you've distracted said polar bear. It's whether or not it wants more of the free fish.
The polar bear looks up and thinks, I can smell more of those.
Yeah.
So our fisherman
keeps throwing. Yeah.
So this is about no free fish. You and I were taught as buyers the metaphor was to bring the account manager down the mountain. What can I get for free? Can I get free sampling? Ask. Can I get a cost reduction? Can I get quicker deliveries, better payment terms? Just keep asking. Yeah. And then when you get something, you thank and bank it. Thank you very much for those payment terms. What else could you do for me? Now, our job as effective negotiators is not to allow free fish. And the way we do that is if you can give me an extra 50 stores, whatever it is, then I'll reduce your payment terms.
Okay.
So it's conditional giveaways. You never give away a free fish without asking for something in return.
Right. Okay. Okay. Fine.
So no more free fish is the takeaway from here.
Okay. And then you talk about the big outrageous ask. I certainly remember being trained on this at Sainsbury's, and I think it's called lots of different things for lots of different people. But that's the idea of you're the first time you put an offer on the table, it's quite excessive, I guess, and compared to where you would actually like to end up. Is that a reasonable description?
It is. The research from many deals and negotiations over the last 20 years suggests that most people aren't ambitious enough. So if we come back to our square dance, we've got our wish and our walk away. The wish is not a big enough wish because we just need to ask sometimes. And with our boa, our snake metaphor of a big outrageous ask, as long as it's credible, ask. Right. Let's see where it goes, but it has to be credible. There's no point in asking for stupid stuff and losing your credibility. But there is every chance you ask for a bit more. And let's say we ask every account manager watching this, and maybe every buyer. If you could ask for just 1% more, it would be outrageous. And if you've got 1 in 100 and you do 200 deals a year, that's worth quite a lot of money.
Yeah. Okay.
It's worth asking.
Yeah, for sure. How do you've talked about credibility a couple of times. Is there a way of kind of defining that? Because I guess what a credible cost price increase request now in November 2022, when the economic situation is horrendous, it's probably very different to what it was 3 or 4 years ago, for example, for certain categories that might have been suffering from inflation. I mean, as a guide, is it just a subjective thing? It either feels credible or it doesn't, or is there a way of kind of making that a bit more objective?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one we get asked a lot, and unfortunately the answer is not great, because the answer is that it only comes from experience. And so with any account managers that we're talking about at the moment, it's asking those around you with more experience, getting 2 or 3 opinions to understand, is 12% credible? I think so. Okay. And then you need to break it down. So if it were, we're taught in surveys that there's 7 degrees, which are important. So you might go to your boss and say, I'm asking for 11, 12, 13, there's 7 degrees here. Put a line where it's credible and not credible. There. Okay, good. We need to ask in a way that's not leading and is tangible. And by writing down 7 different options and ask them to put a line without really saying anything else, that side's not credible, that side is, okay, so it's that number. That would really help them to be credible.
Right. Okay. Okay, so
it's tangible.
Yeah, okay. And one thing that interests me on this part of the process is how much would you advise negotiators to be evidencing the let's just assume that most, certainly at the moment, are kind of cost price driven. How much would you advise people to kind of evidence? So let's just say that they're arbitrarily kind of asking for 10 pence, per unit more. Is it kind of, you just put that on the table and then you wait for the response, or do you say it's 10 pence and 3 pence is driven by gas, 2 pence by electric, 3 pence by logistics, etc., etc.? What's your kind of guidance on that? It's
a long answer, Ben, because I've been thinking about this one for 2 decades. So I'll give you a couple of answers and we'll see how they resonate. There's 2 schools of thought in asking why. If you say to me, I want to buy your Fiesta for £4,000, and I say why, you're going to tell me. Now, because I've asked why, I've invited you in, and I've invited that information in, and you tell me that, well, I've got 3 kids that I can't afford shoes for, and I can't get to work, and I work 40 hours every 3 days. Wow. Okay. You've now built a wall that I've got to climb over.
Right.
So I've just made my life harder. Now, if I don't ask why, I may not have uncovered that the reasons you're giving are rubbish and I can knock them down.
Right. Okay.
So there's 2 schools of thought. You ask why, you might get reasons, and they're built up a really good case that you can't overcome. Ouch. Or you don't ask why, and potentially they haven't got any reasons and they're playing poker.
Right. Okay.
So I'm 50-50 on these. If you ask or don't ask, you might get it, you might not.
Right. Interesting.
Now, if I had to pick one, I'd say ask.
Right.
But know what you're walking into. I might get an extreme amount of information from you. I get a wall and I can't climb that wall.
Right. Okay. Anecdotally, I'm hearing that a lot of retailers they're asking for kind of justification, I think, at the moment, so that they can link things to their own energy trackers, for example. But hopefully we're in a relatively unique period of time now, and in future negotiations, you don't necessarily need to kind of evidence everything quite as heavily.
You don't. Now, the other reason that the buyers are asking for evidence, they're rightly doing their due diligence, as they should. Why do you want a price increase? Show me the evidence. The other reason they're asking is so they can look at that evidence a bit like a piece of cheese and poke holes in it. Of course, you and I did the same. Now, here's the other bit that we need to be aware of. The brain is split into 4. I'll try and do this really quickly. We've got the top half, the bottom half, the left and the right brain. Most people know about the left and the right brain. Left brain's logical, right brain's a bit more creative. But there's actually a top and bottom as well.
Okay.
If you get the fact part brain-driven buyers, they're going to want loads and loads of information because that's where they're comfortable.
Right.
With other buyers, you will be asked less information. So the point is here, an account manager and a buyer needs to understand who they're dealing with. Are they driven by facts? There are 4 types: facts, form, feelings, and future. They're the 4 we're split into.
Okay.
Get one of these guys, which is the facts guys, they're going to want endless amounts of facts.
Right.
But we need to understand the animal that we're dealing with. There's a bit more on our website called HBDI, which helps you identify different people and the way they think.
Right. Okay. So that would just come from your relationship with the buyer and having done some kind of previous discovery with those individuals. Okay. 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 So we're probably, it feels like we're making good progress through this kind of hypothetical negotiation. We've done really good preparation. We've done some exploratory work. We've done tradables. We've got some offers on the table now. How do you kind of bring this process to a conclusion?
Well, I'm actually going to jump back, if that's all right, before I conclude it, because
Yep.
In our stages, preparation, exploration, everyone's heard of open questions and closed questions. And you know, if I ask you that a closed question, you'll say to me, Darren, closed question, I only get a yes or no to.
Yeah.
In our experience of training a lot of people, everyone understands open and closed questions. No one does it in practice.
Right. Okay.
So when they're exploring, if they do this stage, which they should, they need to uncover, what does the other person want? Yes, you want a better price, but what else is important to you? And asking open questions and genuinely sitting back and waiting for the answer is absolutely critical if you're going to explore what's in their head.
Right. Okay.
We do this approach. Sorry, go
on. This is an approach I know reasonably well because it works very well with my teenage children. I find that if they come home from school and say, "Did you have a good day at school?" you get a kind of a grunted yes or a grunted no. Whereas if you say, "What was the best bit about your school day?" you at least get some dialogue going. So yeah, I can relate to that.
Perfect. And that you're absolutely right. You get some dialogue going, and that's what you want with these open questions. Now, the way to remember these is 5 bums on a rugby post. So a rugby post, 5 W's. The 5 W's:
right.
Where, what, when, which, who, and the H is how. That's how we start our open questions.
Okay.
All right. So 5 bums on a rugby post is the metaphor I want to put in people's heads.
Okay. That works very well. So so lots of dialogue to do really good exploration that you can then use as tradables and kind of move forward from there. Okay.
Absolutely. In order to put together in stage 3 your proposal. So I'll give you an example. If I take stage 3, what typically happens, let's imagine I'm on a car forecourt and I'm dribbling over this red 2-seater sports car. It's lovely. Let's call it a Porsche 911. I really want it. Oh, gorgeous. The guy comes over, only had 2 owners. One was a vicar, 30,000 miles, service, and he's off with his patter.
Yeah.
But what he doesn't realize is I've got 6 kids. No, I haven't. But let's say I've got 6 kids. I'm never going to buy that damn car. I'd love to, but I can't. What he needs to start with is exploration. What are you looking for? Why are you looking for that? What's your family size? Blah, blah, blah. Then he says, over there is the SUV that you need. Yes.
Okay.
Often we go into negotiations, straight into proposal stage. The other person doesn't like it because we've no idea what they want.
Right. Okay. And you're just immediately at loggerheads. Yeah. Okay. You talk about the management of expectations and conditioning being quite an important element. Just talk a little bit more about that, if you would.
Let's stick with our car industry for a moment. Your car breaks down, the engine's smoking, but you just managed to limp it to the local garage. You go in, there's the guy sitting behind the service desk. He's covered in oil, he's got the overalls, it's a garage, okay, I'll get it. And you say to him, my car is it's gone. It's smoking, there's oil coming out of everywhere, it's horrible. What's the first thing he does before he says anything?
And try not to be too offensive to my local mechanics that I've dealt with over the years. Yeah. Makes lots of noise about how expensive it's going to be, I presume.
So the first thing this guy does when you tell him your engine's screwed is he goes, and what do you know at that point, as soon as he does that?
That it's probably not entirely true because there's no investigation being done and no discovery. So that individual is setting some expectations the other way. Yeah.
So you know you're likely to get absolutely had on this.
Yeah.
The bill that you thought was 500 quid and now just gone to £5,000.
Yeah.
He has managed your expectations in under about a second.
Mm-hmm.
Conditioning is really important. Now, we can't do the cliche conditioning of our garage friends, but we can do conditioning. We already do it at the moment. So you ask me for £8 a case. And if I go, let me ask my boss, you're walking away thinking, you could get £8 a case here. Rock on. Whereas actually, in my mind, I've panicked and gone, oh, shit, no way can I get it, but let me ask. You don't know what's going on in my mind. So we need to condition people to manage their expectations. So when you ask me for £8 a case, I say, I think that's going to be tough, really tough. But let me just ask and okay, I've managed your expectations that £8 a case is going to be tough.
Right. Okay.
We need to do that for them and for us to manage this expectation. Otherwise, if I don't manage your expectation and I come back 2 days later and go, no way to £8 a case, you go, oh, I thought you could. I didn't say I could.
Yeah.
I thought you could. And then what happens is they talk about this foggy thing, which is body language, but they can't articulate it, so they end up having an argument.
Right. Okay. So in that instance, the negotiation is oscillating very hard, isn't it? It's kind of, there's false expectations being set on one side, and then promptly bubbles are being popped, 2 days later, and it just builds up resentment and lack of trust. Yeah.
And it becomes horrible. And trust is really important in negotiation. There's a trust model that has 4 parts: reliability, intimacy, credibility, and self-orientation. And we need to make sure we understand all 4 parts of this, because some bright spark many years ago said trust is a bit foggy. Hold on, I'll break it down. 4 parts. So if I don't trust you, it might be because of reliability. When you say you're going to do something, you never do.
Right.
Credibility, if I ask you about Viper, I'd expect you to know the answer. Absolutely, you're credible. Mm-hmm. Intimacy is, do I know a little bit about you and a little bit, you know a little bit about me? Well, you and I, for instance, have talked about Sainsbury's. We have a little bit of intimacy. But all of this can be killed by the 4th part, which is self-orientation. If I only talk about me, you're going to get fed up.
Right, okay.
So if our listeners are thinking about anyone they do trust or don't trust, if you trust them, you have all 4 parts ticked. If you don't trust them, one of those parts is missing.
Okay, that's very interesting. There's lots of moving parts at play, aren't there, to really kind of conclude a successful negotiation. Very, very interesting. But doing this kind of live and face to face, as we're used to, it's quite a challenge, isn't it? Quite a challenge.
It is. It's not easy, and there's a reason that buyers and account managers are paid the big bucks. They should be, because they are dealing with very complex soft skills that they need to master. They don't want to be amateur negotiators that just say fight or flight. They need to be masters of this.
Yeah,
that's
very, very interesting. Darren, we are running out of time. How would you wrap up in terms of kind of final bits of guidance for people having been through this process so far?
The biggest challenge that most people face is lack of preparation, because they don't know how to prepare effectively. Okay. Google MBM squared hearts. Whether you buy anything from us or you don't, it will make you a better negotiator. Download the template and just use it, because it will ask you all the questions you don't want to be asked about the negotiation that's coming up. And I want them to be the very best version of their negotiating self. That's my job. That's what we do.
Okay.
That's my take.
Darren, it's been genuinely really interesting. There's lots of directions we could have gone in, I suspect, but in the interest of time, we're going to have to wrap it up. So I really appreciate your time today. And Darren, thank you very much for participating in the Innovate podcast. Thanks. Thanks a lot, Ben. Hope to see you again next time. Yep, very good. And thank you for tuning in, listeners. There will be more episodes coming down the line, but thank you for your time today. We really hope you enjoyed that episode of the Innovate podcast. To hear more bi-weekly episodes, please hit the subscribe button below. Thank you.